Welcome, everybody. Anybody here for the first time tonight? Welcome. Welcome back, everyone else. Welcome to anybody joining us on Zoom for the first time. Let me fix that. Got it. I'd like to start class by asking you to talk to each other in service of this being a group where you not only get to meditate and learn about Buddhism, but also meet other people who are interested in this path and are practicing it or interested in practicing it. For a topic for the small groups, I'd like you to reflect for a moment on your life and what are some of the things in your life that you're pretty attached to, pretty maybe even dependent on, addicted to? Is there some things that you're addicted to that you feel like you can't be happy without? Relationships that you feel like you need in order to feel happy, or foods you feel like you need, or experiences like that need, like when you think of it, like I need. And in Buddhism, and I'm often talking about the difference between wanting and needing, and that which we are, attached to, and that which we are not attached to, but we're participating in. Of course, the whole emphasis of Buddhism is that everything that we're clinging to, that we're attached to, is causing us suffering. The cause of suffering is attachment, is clinging, is craving, is and that the end of suffering comes from non-attachment. And so I'm going to talk tonight about that dilemma that we have as householders. Most of the teachings that I'm giving, that Buddhism gives, comes from a monastic tradition, people who have renounced participating in sense pleasures and material things. And then we're over here saying like, oh, I don't want to go that far. I want to be able to participate in sexuality and money and sensuality and material things. I want to have my stuff. And so, of course, the goal becomes, and what I'm going to talk about tonight is, how do we find that appropriate balance of non-attachment in the midst of participating, where the Buddha and the monastic tradition says we're just not going to participate. It's too hard to be non-attached to sensual pleasure. It's too hard to be non-attached to material things. So we're just going to give it up. It's easier to renounce it completely. So reflecting on your place, some of you are brand new and you're like, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. I just wanted to learn some mindfulness. But just reflecting, what are the things that we feel like I need? I can't live without. It's the source of my happiness. Now, I'm setting you up, right? Because the core Buddhist teaching is there's no refuge, there's no source of happiness that is reliable except for our own wisdom. Right? This is the whole goal of Buddhism, is to understand that is only you're the only source of your happiness. There's no sense pleasure, there's no person, there's no place. Now, there's lots of people and places and things that bring us a tremendous amount of pleasure and even happiness, like a kind of unreliable but real happiness that we get from our relationships, that we get from certain sense pleasures or, experiences of comfort or joy, things that bring us joy, but they're not reliable. So, of course, the Buddhist teaching is to develop a reliable internal refuge. So I'm going to talk a lot about that tonight. I think that's my topic anyways. Renunciation, the importance of renunciation. But I want to start with that acknowledgement that it's probably, you probably have a list of things that you feel like you can't live without. Maybe, if you're honest, if you're humble enough to be like, yeah, I feel like I need my stuff. Like I need my house the way that it is. I couldn't live in a studio. I'd be miserable in a, ramshackle apartment. Maybe you live in a ramshackle apartment and you're happy with it. But if so that sort of like, oh, I'm quite attached, I need that. Or having a conversation with somebody earlier, they just got a new car and so excited about their new car and thinking like, oh, this car is going to make me happy. But, had enough Dharma understanding to kind of know, like, I know the new car is not going to really make me happy, but it's really fun to have a new car. Or relationships, of that feeling of like, maybe you're in a relationship and you feel like, oh, I really need this person. Like I couldn't go on without them. I'd be miserable. This loving, and maybe it's a loving, healthy relationship. And there's that feeling of, I need this relationship in order to continue to be happy. Or maybe you're not in a relationship and you're, have that other feeling of like, I can't be happy until I'm in the right sort of relationship. Would a loving relationship would make me happy. Then everything would be good if I just had the right lover, the right partner, the right connection. And that's a pretty common human feeling. I need the right partner. So what is it for you? What are some of the things that you're attached to and maybe even addicted to? Now, if you're going to use the term addiction, I'll define it as compulsive and repetitive behaviors that cause you harm. So don't be like, I'm addicted to meditating. I'm addicted to exercising. I'm super addicted to broccoli, man. You can eat all the broccoli and you can do the meditation and you can do the exercise and all that. And don't classify those as addictions, because those are not compulsive behaviors that lead to harm. They lead to health. You're like, oh, I'm addicted to meditating. You're addicted to recovery meetings, man. You kick the dope and now you're strung out on recovery community. It's like, no, that's a healthy thing to do. It's not an addiction. It's a healthy, maybe even a healthy dependence. So anyways, that's my opinion about when we're talking about addiction. But maybe there are some things that you're addicted to that you feel like can't let go of, that are causing you some harm. I know that was a lot, but really just want you to talk to each other about what are some of the stuff you're attached to. So find 2 or 3 people in the room. It's best if you do this with people you don't know rather than your friends that you're with, because that's the only way you're going to meet some people that you don't know. So maybe stand up, introduce yourself, meet some people in the room, talk for a few minutes about what you're attached to. At home, I'll open up the breakout rooms. I encourage you to join the breakout rooms. It's easier to meet people when you actually talk to them. One of the first tasks of mindfulness meditation is breaking our addiction to thinking. And I think we can probably all acknowledge that our thinking is a compulsive behavior that leads to harm. How often we harm ourselves with our own judgments and criticisms and the afflictive emotions that we identify with in our minds that cause us harm, the comparing and then insecurity and jealousy and anger and resentments and all of those mind tendencies that create suffering for us. And the first instruction in meditation is in some way or another, it's ignore your mind and pay attention to your body breathing. Break your addiction to always being involved in the thoughts. Come back to the breath, come back to the body. And then later we open. The Buddha encourages us to say, no, you can't ignore your mind forever. You can't practice renunciation or abstinence from thinking. So we have to actually train the mind. We have to create healthy thought patterns and change our relationship to the mind by starting to see how impermanent thought is, how impersonal thought is. We can renounce thinking in the beginning, try to abstain from thinking, break our addiction to being so identified with our mind, but eventually we have to open up to observing the mind and finding some discernment about what thoughts to trust and which ones to acknowledge as ignorance. And that, I think it's a little bit hard for people who don't meditate to have the humility to be accused of being ignorant, of looking at our minds and acknowledging that a good percentage of what arises in the mind is not true and is not worthy of our attention and is going to create a bunch of suffering for us. And so, we open the instructions in meditation to observing and identifying, like, oh, that's just fear. Oh, that's worry again. That's judging. That's comparing. And having a relationship to all of these unhelpful tendencies of our mind. Maybe helpful on a survival level, but not helpful on a happiness level. And usually we come to meditation because we've decided, I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be peaceful. I'd like to have some freedom from unnecessary suffering in my life. And so then we have this task, and mindfulness is this tool to give us the skills, first to ignore the mind and then to train and observe the mind. So I'll give some instructions, we'll meditate, and then we'll talk about renunciation. So find a way to sit that's upright, relaxed, find a posture that feels sustainable, allowing your eyes to be closed, your body to become settled into relative stillness. But take a moment to release any unnecessary tension. Make sure that you're sitting in a way that's not too tight, too rigid or stiff. Balancing the vertebrae in an upright way, the head resting on the neck. Let the jaw release, the shoulders, the belly soften. Let the chair support you or the cushion. And allowing our hands to rest in our lap or on our legs, wherever feels appropriate. And as we undertake this task of training the mind, of developing wisdom, I always encourage us to begin with establishing kindness, the intention to be friendly and patient and accepting with the process, to be kind to the confused mind, to the uncomfortable body. And establishing mindfulness, focusing our attention on the sensations of the breath as we disengage from the thinking mind. Let the thoughts be in the background. Focus your attention on the sensation that the breath creates at the nostrils or chest or belly. The Buddha said something like, breathing in, know that you're breathing in. Breathing out, know that you're breathing out. What gives you that awareness of the breath coming and going as the primary object of attention? When the attention gets drawn away from the breath back into thinking or somewhere else in your experience, acknowledge it, name it. But remember the intention of friendliness and kindness. Just accept thinking again. Then gently choose to return to the breath. We're not trying to stop the mind, but we are trying to stop being so involved, so identified with what the mind is up to. For tonight's practice, keep it simple, just the breath, just the body. In one teaching, the Buddha said that all of the Dharma, the truth about reality, all that we need to know to be free from suffering, will be revealed right here in the body. That we're not thinking our way to freedom, but through investigating the physical sensations, come to understand the causes of suffering and what ends suffering. The body breathes all by itself. Awareness receives the breath, knows. The heart beats all by itself, the organs doing their job, the nervous system feeling, and the mind thinks. But with training, we can choose what we pay attention to, how we relate to what's happening in the body, the heart, and the mind. It becomes more and more clear that all of the experiences are impermanent, changing. And that so much of what we've been taking personal, being identified with, is quite impersonal, just the body, subject to aging, illness, death. The self-centered tendency of our minds, also not your fault, not personal. It's part of the human condition. I really appreciate the straightforwardness and kind of pragmatic approach that the Buddha took to awakening or meditation. Very much just identifying if you're not happy and peaceful and at ease, equanimous about things, why? What is it that's blocking your happiness? Now, I think we have a tendency to blame external circumstances, to be like, well, it's this person, it's this situation, it's this, it's the world, it's the, ignorance of the world. If the world were just, then I'd be happy. It's quite easy to get stuck in that story, and it's not true. Actually, even if there was no ignorance and oppression in the world, we would still be creating suffering for ourselves based on clinging and craving and, the attachment that causes our suffering. Now, when there's major things going on, it's easy to be like, that's why. Of course, I'm attached to justice. Of course, I'm attached to the world being different than it is. But the Buddhist teaching is that actually we don't need the world to change at all, or anyone else to change at all, to be happy, to be peaceful, to be at ease, to end suffering. That we don't have to wait for anyone else to change. That everything that we need to experience happiness, for lack of a better word, freedom, contentment, nirvana, the Buddha's word, is right here in us. That there's no external, nothing needs to change out there. Everything that needs to change is in here for us to be happy, for us to be at peace with ourselves the way we are. The core, the way that the Buddha put it, he used this word, he said the core issue, the core problem, the cause of suffering, of unhappiness, of stress, of all of our difficulties, the core cause, he used the word tanha. Tanha is a Pali word that translates most directly, we tend to translate it as craving. Craving is the cause of suffering. But the word actually means thirst. Tanha means to be thirsty. And, thirsty as in like the alcoholic thirst, like as in the dying, like I have to, not just like, I'm a little parched, I'd like a sip of my tea, but I could take it or leave it, right? It's not that kind of thirst. It's the kind of like, I have to have it. And so as we reflect, as I asked us earlier in the beginning of class to reflect on what are all the things that we think we need, that we're craving for, that we're clinging to, that we're addicted to, that we're tanha, how does it show up in your life? And sometimes it's pretty obvious, the external behaviors, sense pleasures, that we're addicted to. Sometimes it's looking at you ever find yourself having enough humility to be like, I'm addicted to anger. I'm in this compulsive, repetitive, of like feeling angry and maybe that justified, like it feels so good to be right and angry at everybody else for, and it's more like an emotional clinging. So then the Buddha says, we don't have to live like that, and nirvana is possible. You can free yourself. You can end craving. You can end tanha, and you can experience nirvana. It's possible. And how do we get there? You can get there through the Eightfold Path. And we can break the Eightfold Path up into three categories. One is the wisdom that we develop, understanding reality as it is, and not the conditioned ignorance that we think about the world, not some of our religious ignorance that we've been conditioned with. Understanding karma. Karma is one of the things we need to understand. Cause and effect is in effect. Part of what's happening here is that cause and effect is it's happening. So the wisdom is understanding and intentions and changing our intentions. But then the next, intentionally being kind. Like I said in the beginning of meditation, set your intention to be kind, to be friendly. And probably you saw during meditation that your mind wasn't kind and friendly and accepting. And it's not the mind's tendency to be kind and friendly and compassionate towards your own pain. It's the mind's tendency to hate pain. And so this is part of the wisdom. I have to learn this radical transformation from aversion as the natural human tendency towards unpleasantness to tolerance and mercy and compassion, kindness towards our own pain and the pain of others. So that's the wisdom. And then the next three are renunciation. And I wanted to mostly focus on renunciation, but the way that it's in the Eightfold Path, it is right speech, renouncing. And even this term renunciation is a little like, maybe I could define it more simply as quitting, stopping, abstaining, not indulging in, not engaging in. So not engaging in speech that is going to have a karmic, an effect that's going to be negative, a harmful effect. So what we call wise or right speech, right action. Not engage, it's a renunciation, not engaging in behaviors that are going to create negative karma for us. And the Buddha gives 5: killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, and indulgence in intoxicants as 5 levels of renunciation. He says, if you want nirvana, you want happiness, you want freedom, minimum level of renunciation, not killing, not lying, not stealing, not engaging in inappropriate sexual relationships that are causing harm to ourselves or others when there's dishonesty or any kind of unskillfulness in it, intentional harm being caused. And the 5th renunciation, I think has been most challenging for a lot of people, to not drink alcohol or engage in any kind of recreational drug use. We're in a strange place in Buddhism. Last week, Jeff online, who's my co-host on the Zoom and good friend, and he's a Dharma teacher. And he asked me that question last week about what I knew about the Buddha's prophecy that Buddhism won't last, and that there's these kind of, in Buddhism, and at the time of the Buddha, supposedly, we don't really know what the fuck he said, but supposedly, there was a time where he said, the Dharma, the true Dharma, the Buddha Dharma is only going to last so long because it will become so corrupted by human ignorance. And I can't help but reflect on, here we are in the West, 2,600 years after the Buddha. Buddhism seems to be alive and well, and there's Buddhism all over Asia still. There's Japanese Zen Buddhism, and there's Tibetan Buddhism, and they're like the newest school, but the they're the rock stars, the Dalai Lama, he's like, they got the cool art, like I'm over here like, yeah, I like the Tibetan art way better. It's cool. They got the cool demons and shit. I'm into that. It's super metal. But the situation in the West, and it's maybe probably wrong of me to say the West, but having learned Buddhism 35 years ago from mostly Western teachers that don't practice the fifth precept, and the kind of, as Buddhism came to America by a bunch of hippies, especially this form of Buddhism, the Western convert Buddhism. And a bunch of hippies that were like, we're over in India, like smoking hash and, taking acid in the 60s or whatever. And we found spirituality, or Ram Dass and all those guys and women that were the kind of founding, But as they took the path of Buddhism and the practice, they didn't give up their drugs. Like almost none of them heeded the Buddha's teaching that said, if you want to be mindful and do this path, don't put into your body that which blocks mindfulness, intoxicants. Don't smoke weed, don't drink alcohol, don't, microdose. You can't be mindful while you're microdosing. Don't do that. It blocks your ability to be mindful. So it's an interesting, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of going on a tangent, but the kind of decline of Buddhism, what Jeff was asking about, of like, kind of from the time where, it was started 2,600 years ago, and how it's migrated, how it's changed, and how Buddhism has changed as it's gone to each new country. And in Tibet, it got mixed with some Hinduism and some of their Bön tradition. And in China, it got mixed with Taoism and Confucianism. And in Japan, it got mixed with their Shinto religion. And here in the West, it's getting mixed with psychotherapy, and it's getting mixed with, it's become so, I'm also guilty, of some of this mixing. And but for whatever reason, I came to Buddhism out of desperation because of addiction, because of the suffering that addiction created in my life. So when I heard this was a path that supports abstinence from drugs and alcohol, I was like, that's perfect for me, because I need to be abstinent because I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict. So I can't fuck with that stuff. So being involved in a spiritual tradition that encourages, teaches abstinence as part of the process. But then, I came to find out that none of my teachers were practicing that, and that Buddhism in the West was sort of encouraging of like, it's okay to drink in moderation, smoke some weed, drop some psychedelics, because of the hippie founders that were like, we're not giving up our drugs. So the second, fourth factor of the path that's about action, it's all about renunciation. Stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing, stop getting high. Bring your full awareness to your behaviors and to be mindful. And the only reason there's an abstinence encouragement around drugs and alcohol is in service of your mindfulness. There's no moral judgment. It's not bad karma to get high. You just can't be mindful and high at the same time. That's the only, it's not like you're necessarily causing harm to anybody by having taken bong hits or microdosing, and the whole microdosing conversation is developing in an interesting way, which, and I could probably be convinced that it's healthier in some ways to treat some things than some of the psychopharmacology, toxins that the Western medicine has created. So there's an interesting argument for it as a medicine, but the Buddha is saying no recreational use of anything that you're doing just for fun, and that there's no such thing as sort of sacred intoxication from a Buddhist perspective. All of this like plant medicine, like I'm doing it for my spirituality, not in line with Buddhism ever. There's no argument for it as part of a Buddhist path. Buddhist path is abstinence-based. Train your mind. See clearly based in your own effort and no sort of toxins that are giving you a false report about reality. Or maybe even a true report about reality, but it's not earned through your own wisdom. It's just a sort of glimpse of something. And then the fifth factor of the path, right livelihood, and renouncing, not engaging in order to create wealth in anything that's going to create negative karma for us. So also encouragement. Don't, be careful around your relationship to money and greed and clinging and taking jobs or taking money for something that's causing harm to you or anyone else. So abstaining from harmful livelihoods, abstaining from harmful behaviors, abstaining from harmful speech. But within that, within the 5 precepts, pretty low level of renunciation. And kind of where I started and where I want to get to tonight to explore together is this dilemma that we are in. I don't know if you feel like you're in, I feel like can be a dilemma of knowing the cause of suffering is clinging and craving, and knowing that the idea is non-attachment, that the ideal is having a balanced relationship to sense pleasures, not needing, but finding a way to indulge in sexuality without turning it into suffering, finding a way to indulge in money and material things without being so attached that we're suffering about them. Having had and being quite influenced by monks and nuns who give up sex, give up money, and having practiced and now teaching for many years retreat, where we go on retreat. And I remember the first time I went on retreat, and this was pre-cell phone, but letting go, I had to turn off my beeper at the time. And and going into a retreat where I wasn't going to read, I wasn't going to make eye contact, I wasn't going to speak to anybody, I was just going to be in myself. I wasn't going to make any phone calls, I wasn't going to watch any television, and having that experience of renouncing all of my comforts, all of the things that I was used to doing, reading books, watching shows, talking to people, engaging in entertainment, engaging in sensuality, masturbation, letting all of that go and going on to retreat. And I remember it being framed, and I sometimes frame it like this, of like pseudo monasticism. Like, we're not monks or nuns, or, we're not monastics, but you're going to go kind of pretend like you are for the week. You're going to be celibate, you're going to meditate, sitting and walking, you're going to do that all day. And those experiences of renunciation, I believe, changed my relationship to sense pleasures. Seeing that I could not engage in masturbation for a week. Where I was in a habit of regularly engaging, and then saying like, oh, I can actually not engage. That I think I have to read every night before bed. I love to read. And then putting it down and being like, oh, actually, I can go to sleep without reading. I thought I was dependent on reading. And I learned that in juvenile hall. I thought I needed to keep doing that. Oh, I don't need to do that. I can put that down. So we have in the against the stream tradition and sort of the Western, this dilemma of, yes, we get to do, you can have sex and money and stuff, but are you suffering about it? Are you causing suffering to yourself around it? And where's the role of renunciation? Not just not killing humans, but the precepts as a practice. You know, I actually have to confess that I murdered today. There's a whole bunch of flies in our kitchen, and I murdered maybe one or two of them. And it's against my precepts. You know, like I actually try not to kill, and then sometimes I engage and be like, I'm gonna fucking kill this fly right now. For a while in the beginning of my relationship, I got my wife to do it, but then she caught on. She caught on. She's like, oh, you're trying to let me get all the karma? Fuck you. I'm not doing all the murdering in this house. I'm thinking about this for a couple reasons. One is today I started a fast. Have you fasted before? I'm starting I'll probably only do a 5-day juice fast. But over the years, I've been fasting, you know, maybe once a year. Sometimes I've not done it for a few years. Sometimes I've done it a few times in a year. And I think it's such a cool and powerful practice to not eat. Because there's that sort of feeling of like, no, I have to eat at least twice a day, probably 3 times a day. And there's I don't know if any of you brought it up in that conversation of like that idea of like, I have to eat. And not only do I have to eat, I need to eat what I like. And I need to eat not only what I like, but what I think is delicious, what I think is healthy, what I think is, and that's a kind of a core need for us. But it's so cool to take a break from it and being like, you know what? I don't have to eat anything. I can survive on liquids as long as you have some water. I'm doing some juice. And to after a day or two and being like, wow, I eat all of the time. And I think I need to eat all of the time. But it's not true. That's not a behavior that in the long run, of course, you do have to eat. But that taking a break, practicing renunciation around food, I find so interesting for me. And that it changes my relationship to food. I'm such an indulgent person by nature, by tendency, by conditioning, by whatever it is, that I'll go, pretty quickly back into eating burritos for breakfast. But taking that break and being like, this is actually a choice. It's not a need. It's a desire that I can choose to satisfy or not. Likewise with sexuality, I don't know, have you been celibate? You ever celibate by choice, not just like I can't get laid, but celibate by choice, including masturbation, full abstinence, depending on your relationship to masturbation. Some people like to masturbate quite often, some people not so much, but such an interesting practice to say, I'm going to take a month or 2 months or 3 months and not engage in any sexuality, especially if you're single. If you're single, you have that opportunity more. And also if you're single, maybe, I don't know if this is true for you. It's usually true for me when I'm single. When I'm single, I think I need sex. That's a source of happiness. I think, I need a partner. I need to masturbate like that. It feels like it's more convincing when there's not the opportunity. But practicing in my early 20s, many of you heard me talk about this. In my early 20s, I had this teacher who was encouraging celibacy even for householders as a spiritual practice. And so I took a vow of celibacy, and he said, just, try it for 30 days. Try to just not masturbate, not engage in sex for a month. And I was like, okay, I've never tried that before. Ever since I discovered masturbation when I was, 11 or 12 or whatever, I've just done it, just regularly. I don't know, not necessarily compulsively, but just I started masturbating, and when I feel like doing it, I do it. And then I was about 20 or so, and it's like, I've never tried not to. what would it be like to not masturbate for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days? And for me, being a bit of an extremist, and also because I'd been very inspired by Buddhism, and I had these monks that had been celibate for decades, I was like, okay, 30 days, that was interesting. I'm going to go for 60. I'm going to go for 90. It turned into 2 years of celibacy, of not masturbating, of not engaging in any type of volitional sexuality. A little under 2 years, but about 2 years. And I learned so much about craving and the impermanent nature of craving. And I learned so much about loneliness and being able to be with myself and not looking at pornography and not seeking, but actually having that much more time and energy for meditation, that much more time and energy for investigating and being present with my emotions, my mind state, and not looking outside of myself for happiness. A few years ago, I was in Thailand with one of my teachers, my monastic teacher, Ajahn Amaro, and he gave one talk that I was moved by. And he was giving this talk to kind of public Thai, primarily Thai audience, and he talked about the importance of in Buddhism of learning to be hungry and to not just snacking all of the time, but to actually letting yourself be hungry, letting yourself investigate and work with feelings of hunger. And breaking that compulsive tendency to, like, I'm hungry, so I eat. It's okay to be hungry. And I don't know if you're aware of this, most of you probably are. Thai Theravadan monastics take a vow to not eat any food after noon. So they get a little breakfast and a big lunch at like about 11 a.m. or just before midday, and then they never have dinner. And so he's talking from direct experience of what it's like probably every single day for the last 50 years to experience hunger. And how powerful it is to learn to be with that, and the teaching of, desire arises and it passes. It's okay not to satisfy desire. He said, I encourage everyone, take the other reason I'm thinking about this tonight is because a friend of mine, student, the other day we were talking, and she said she's going to do a 90-day householder retreat where she's going to practice the 8 precepts for 3 months. Now, the 8 precepts, so the 5 precepts I talked about: don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, no sexual misconduct, no intoxicants. Now, the 8 precepts add 3 practices. One is to not eat after midday, to take that like the monks and the nuns, and to say no dinner, no snacking, no dinner. I get to eat a big meal in the middle of the day. That's it, 1 meal. Or, you can have a little bit of breakfast and then a big lunch. The other 2 are no entertainment. I saw some snarls. To let go of entertainment, no music, no shows, no reading for pleasure. You can do a little bit of reading for study but no entertainment. And not sleeping in a comfortable bed. Oh no, it's no entertainment. I mean, it's no adornments. And for this woman, she might be, I didn't see if she's here tonight or not. And I feel like this maybe is a bit more gender specific around adornments. I might get in trouble for this, but I'll say it anyways. That women tend to have more adornments and makeup and stuff like that than men. So for a guy, it's a bit maybe easier to be like, yeah, I'm not going to wear my bracelet or my ring or my, but for a woman, she's saying, and this is a woman who really likes makeup. Some women, it's like a thing, right? Like some women, not so much, it's no big deal because you don't wear much makeup. It's like no adornments, no big deal. But this is a woman who like does really cool, like makeup fucking bad eyes and shit. Super goth punk, like fucking put it on. And she said, I'm going to do 90 days and I'm going to, and celibacy. I'm going to, I'm going to be celibate. I'm not going to eat after midday. I'm not going to do the adornments. And I'm going to do this renunciation practice because for her, motivated partially by some relational things that she was seeing and identifying some unhealthy behaviors in relationship and saying, I'm going to take a break from sex. I'm going to take a break from seeking even and practice celibacy and go ahead and frame it in this 8 precept practice and let go of the entertainment that can take us away. The other thing that Amaro was saying in that teaching, he says, learn to be hungry. He said, also learn to be lonely. Also radical advice. And, it's like loneliness is the enemy. Like, oh, I'm lonely. I'm going to try to find companionship, friendship, something. I'm going to find some entertainment, some distraction. It's not okay to just learn to be with my loneliness and to just tend to that unpleasant emotion of feeling alone and wishing that I wasn't alone. And he said, what a great practice, important. We learned that on retreat. And art, like the monks probably know a lot about that. But if you come on retreat, you're all invited. We have a 7-day retreat coming up. And if you go on retreat, you probably experience that. Like, here I am, and I'm not going to talk to anybody for a week. I feel lonely, even though there's other people around. There's no connection. There's no interaction. There's no communication. And we start to see, so much of my self-esteem, so much of the way that I know myself is through interacting with others. Not so good at interacting with myself, of being in my own heart and mind and body, just as it is, without the being witnessed, without being celebrated, without being annoyed by other people's attention. So I'm going to end with a statement. It's my view. What I've found over my practice is that I love to indulge in sense pleasures. Okay, that's it. I'll end there. I love to indulge in sense pleasures. I love to read. I like my material things, my cars and motorcycles. I love to travel. I love dopamine hits. I love all of the stuff that's fun and pleasant and joyous in life. And I find that the way that I can relate to it with less, not total non-attachment, but with less attachment, is by taking periods where I don't engage, whether that's on retreat or a fast or a period of celibacy, or by stepping away from engaging, breaking the addiction type tendency to things, even with food, where we can't call food an addiction. I mean, some people literally have eating disorder, food addictions, but all of us have that dependence on food. But taking a week to say, I'm not going to eat, I'm just going to drink liquids this week. I'm going to sit with all of that hunger. Or going on a retreat, or spending a weekend at home and not picking up the phone and say, I'm just going to practice sitting with my loneliness this weekend, rather than thinking I always have to avoid loneliness. What an interesting practice to just sit with it, tend to it. So I guess my statement is, as householders, it's important for us to practice renunciation because we're so indulgent. The 5 precepts are such a low level of renunciation. Now, for me, it does kind of blow my mind that so many people think that giving up drugs and alcohol is too much to ask. Like, really? Like, I want to meditate. I want to but I have to not get high? Fuck that, I'm out. Right? And and of course, the way I present Buddhism certainly is it's not a have to, but it's a strong encouragement. It's the Buddha's teaching to abstain from drugs and alcohol. Now, whether or not you choose to take on that part of the renunciation, entirely up to you. Of course, you're welcome in our community and in Buddhist, community. And you'll find, as I've said before, you'll find more teachers who engage in it than don't. I'm just one of the recovery ones that's like, I don't. And, I'm supported by the Theravadan perspective that says it's not what we do. Renunciation in service of a healthy indulgence, so that our indulgence isn't dependence, but it is choice. So it's not, I can't live without it. Totally can. I experience living without it, but I choose to engage in it, and it's a choice and not a compulsion or a addiction or a need. Few minutes for questions, comments, clarifications. What are your thoughts about renunciation? Dustin, go ahead.
So kind of in that last little bit where you talked about how loneliness, it's good to kind of experience loneliness and so for a lot of us that are in recovery in one form or another, we're encouraged, like, the opposite of addiction is going to be connection. And we're pretty heavily reliant on it, especially like when the mind can really start going and it's just a little too much to suppress, what are some like healthy ways that we're able to kind of, sit in our loneliness without it possibly causing harm? You know what I mean? Because I know as soon as I start to get a little fucking squirrely, I've been taught to pick up the phone or I need to connect. So as to not do something or, cause harm to myself or others. So I just thought that was really interesting. And I'd like to kind of hear your perspective on it.
Buddhism is on some level full of contradictions. Because there is, you've probably heard me talk about this before, Dustin. On one hand, the Buddha says there's no external refuge, nothing outside of yourself. It's going to work. It's an inside job is the core teaching. And then in the next, teaching, he says, take refuge in the Sangha. You need community. You don't want to be isolated in this. You want to be connected with other people in this. And there's this, seeming contradiction of like, wait a minute, isn't the Sangha an external refuge? Isn't that fellowship or that need for, I'm an addict, I have to be connected to other people all of the time. The most dangerous place is for me to be alone in my head. And of course, that's true in the beginning of recovery. And then at some point, we have to break our dependence on community. Now, maybe I should not even phrase it that way. Developing the ability to be alone is healthy. Now, even though it's healthy, we don't want to use that to then become an isolator and kind of saying like, we need community. It's relational. We need to support each other. We need to be of service. We need to receive that. We need to, connection is healthy. And even the monks who, have these vows of celibacy, they live in community. Community is a core to Buddhism. But within that community, sometimes you go on retreat. These guys will go and, live in the cabin by themselves in the monastery for a month or so and learn to just be with themselves. I might like to reframe that statement of connection is the, opposite of addiction, or the opposite of addiction is connection. To include, maybe reframe or investigate to include, actually, when you're connected to your own heart, when you're connected to your own, the Dharma, the Buddha within you, actually, you don't need an external person always to connect with. You can learn to be totally here connected with yourself. Now, in early recovery, when you're still nuts and you can't trust your own thinking at all, then of course you want to surround yourself with people that are wise and that are going to support you, and right, for sure. But at some point we can break that idea that I have to go to a meeting every day or I'm going to drink, or I don't have any ability to self-soothe, that it's always coming from someone else, that, you know, and that one of my critiques of the 12-step method, which encourages, you know, constantly, if you, you know, I think it even says in the literature, you know, we found that when we, you know, had unpleasant feelings, basically, I'm paraphrasing, that we should immediately reach out and be of service to a newcomer. And it's kind of good advice at some stages of our life. But when you've been sober for 10 years and you still don't know how to sit with your own emotions or deal with your own loneliness, and you're constantly, we would call it spiritual bypassing, you're constantly avoiding your own feelings by being of service and connecting with others, rather than learning to sit with your own thoughts and feelings and see they're just thoughts and feelings. You know, when you get to the place where you're like, I'm not going to drink about this shit, it's just uncomfortable. You got to learn to be uncomfortable at some point. And so that's, you know, it's just a little bit of a different perspective. And I don't know, I know you've come to some day-long retreats. Have you done a week-long retreat yet, Dustin?
No, I haven't. Just the Memorial Day. Just
yeah, the 3-day. But you got a taste in that of 3 days, where it's like we're kind of, you know, you're with people, but also like not talking to anybody for 3 days. And being in that, you know, a little bit of loneliness or a little bit of ice, you know, and be like, oh, I can do this. It's okay for me to be with myself for 3 days. I don't need to drink about it. I hope that's somewhat useful. There was a hand. Yeah, please.
Thank you.
I found it interesting, the fasting aspect. So when I was studying Northern Indian music, the rags, sometimes you would fast from a note going up, and then maybe fast from a different note descending, or a couple of notes. And, or how interesting is it, like, to fast from, say, using one hand, or maybe not eating certain foods, and then suddenly I found, oh my God, I really want, you know, chocolate milkshake, because I told myself that no, you know, dairy, no, whatever. So it's, I agree. It's always interesting when you take something out of the mix to see how self responds to it. Thank you, Noah.
Welcome. Any other thoughts in the room? It's just about, it's almost 9, so maybe we'll end there. Lupko, if you'd like to stay afterwards, I'd be happy to answer your question. I'm going to end class now. Thanks for being here. Thanks for reflecting. Again, encouraging you to look at your own life and seeing, you know, where's there some opportunities for some more renunciation, just as a voluntary practice in your own life. And don't go too extreme with it. Find balance, find some people that you have maybe some accountability with. And I'll be here for the next couple Mondays, I believe, next few Mondays. We do have a 7-day retreat coming up. You're all invited. And it's such a great way to deepen our meditation practice, and this experience of renunciation is a central part of being on retreat, of letting go of the entertainment, the adornments, the sense pleasures, only eating what is offered. You don't get to choose what you eat on retreat. Sometimes the food's great, sometimes it's not that great, but it's what's for lunch. And you get to just work with that. And so there's information on that on the website. I think it's September 7th through 15th. So it's coming up, and it's in Southern California mountains up near Big Bear, Lake Arrowhead up there. I think that's all I got for announcements. Classes done by donation. Against the Stream is a nonprofit organization that is fully supported by your donations, your generosity. We don't charge for the class. Everybody's welcome. And We are dependent on our existence, on your generosity. Nobody's paying the bills for us. We pay the bills by giving, and our expenses are somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 a month, just to kind of keep the lights on and keep the building. So if you can give $25 when you drop in for a class, if you feel moved, and if you can become a monthly supporter and saying like, hey, I want to give $50 or $100 a month, and it's sort of an auto debit, and you can do that. Go to the website under monthly supporter, and if you feel moved to, that's a request, but you get to do as you see fit. I think that's all I got for tonight. I don't have anybody working the desk tonight. Tara's out, Sebastian's out. So donations can go in the bowl. There's a QR code for the Venmo. There's an address for the PayPal if you want to do that online. Jeff and Emily have posted the donation links there. If you want any merch, let me know. There's a new poster that's out there on the desk that Mike Giant made. That's $50. That's a sort of fundraiser for the center. If you want to buy one of those, you can just Venmo the $50 to Against the Stream. So thank you. May any goodness that comes from our practice, our discussion of the Buddha's Dharma, be offered outward in all directions. May each one of us get as free as possible in this lifetime. And together may we create a positive change on this planet.